Bob, I think I was hoping we could kind of do a session about the used car invoice. First of all, I'll turn it over to you, but what is it? How should we think about it? And how do we employ it in dealerships and everywhere, really?
So let me give you just a little bit of background. I'm not sure we're going to get it all in if I don't start abbreviating, right? Because we had to set some premises up, right? About, how in the automotive industry, at least in North America, we've devolved, in my estimation, to actually get to a point where we're selling immediately to the bottom, right? We sell everything to the bottom. We sell a new car immediately. You get out the invoice, start telling people you can buy it for less than invoice. We paid this. This is what you pay. So this is just something from a competitive standpoint that, car dealers by nature have learned to do over time. There's only some exceptions. Obviously, a Corvette today is an exception, right? You're getting $20,000 over sticker price in the wholesale market. So it's a little bit different, but obviously on average, everybody is willing to immediately pull out an invoice and start whoring things up to the point where, profit compression extraordinaire, and then making sure you sell it less than everybody else, right?
Everyone has, taken their model, its accepted model, to discount the MSRP and, in some way reference an invoice, unless you have some spectacular inventory that for some reason everybody's willing to pay more for, right? So obviously we're generalized in that regard. And then when you think about it, because all dealers are very resourceful people, we wind up finding other ways to build profit into a deal. Got it. So this becomes a little less transparent, and I would say not going to float perfectly into the future. Obviously everything evolves over time, but my feeling is, and my belief is, that transparency and a product that actually memorializes condition and the rationality around why a trade-in is worth what it's worth is really what has always been lacking, and what we built into as a portion of the Accu-Trade product set is when you VIN-decode, you are beginning a basic condition report. And when you add color and miles and dents and scratch and history, et cetera, you're actually building what we would call a pedigree. And then when you add market data, what you wind up with is the evidence and the proof of, let's call it the relationship between what the marketplace is at a retail level, simultaneously at a wholesale level, to come up with a price that's amiable, that's fair, that's transparent, based on the 17-digit VIN. So when you actually deploy this as a process in a showroom, we have to think about some things that are almost universal in car dealerships, right? Car salespeople are, hungry, obviously, with their one or two customers per day that they get coming through the showroom or off the internet leads, et cetera, to actually create the deal. So this nervousness of and the anxiety that they have to do something with a deal actually creates a circumstance where they become not necessarily an ally of the dealership, because it's to their benefit to put a stroke on the board. So that's a benefit for the dealership. But how you actually get the stroke on the board is then in question. So where's the biggest hole in that process? It's where a salesperson, nervous as could be, best friends for life with a new customer they just met 5 minutes ago, are fighting for the consumer. Now you have to picture this. When you're in a dealership environment, you're sitting with your managers for probably 8 times more of the waking day than you do with your wife or your partner or whoever it is, because you're in that same room for 12 hours every day. What that does is it creates a level of communication that, you can't eliminate the fact that you're communicating with somebody that because you work that your ability to actually negotiate with your management is frequently as good or better than it is with the consumer that you just met, that's your new best friend that you're going to sell a car to. So when the appraisal process begins and you get a number, let me see what kind of great number we got for your trade, because typically the salesperson's not part of that process. You jump up out of your trade, or management, you drop it off there. The first thing that occurs is, oh my God, is that all I'm getting for my car? Okay. Well, what's the next point of conversation? Well, you could be trained in a pencil method or whatever method you're using in the dealership, but it always ends up, let me see if I can get you more, or what would it take to make a deal, or would you take? Okay, if I can get you this, would you? Okay, So any of the variations really don't make any difference. Two things occurred here. One, the salesperson has no concept of what the car is or what the good or bad points are, because he's getting a number. Maybe the manager told him, "That's a piece of shit," or "Boy, that's a nice car. We'd like to trade it." Either way, you've actually, I would call it, disabled logical and fact-based communication, right? So when the process of what our tool does, when you VIN-Decode, you plug in your OBD and it pops up with all the information necessary to understand all the facts about the car, the dent, the scratch, the previous paint, the mechanical issues associated with that car, because the OBD obviously reveals that immediately. And then the relationship to the value of that 17-digit VIN, not the class of car, not the market report, not what hocus pocus of an erector set telling you how much market would be if you 2% of whatever and all the rest of it. No, no, no. The actual commodities value of that VIN based on the characteristics of that VIN, now you actually have a baseline to understand why. By the way, that's guaranteed. It's not a, like a, let's call it a hot air in the wind. It's an offer. It's a check that is associated with insurance, VIN-insurance, on that particular unit to that particular dealership, whether they're a best end user for that vehicle or not, right? So now you have, I would call it a used car invoice, because the invoice highlights all of the characteristics. A new car invoice tells you it's got a shiny tailpipe and it's got graphics on the sunroof and it's got all the nonsense, not nonsense, all the characteristics of that vehicle and how much they cost, right? And now we're going to discount to the bone and try to make a deal. But what you did was you have no place to actually use. If that's logical, which it is, because it's how much you paid for it and how much you're willing to sell it for. Now the question becomes, if it's good for the goose, is it good for the gander? So in other words, if it's good for the goose, you're selling a new car at invoice or 2,000 over because you're so strong. But typically, obviously, it doesn't wind up being that. You're digging into, stair step and invoice and, hold back and all the rest of it. So that's a whole separate issue. We're not changing that. But what we are doing is using the same logic. If that's been the case for the past 70 years, the question becomes, does the used car invoice have the same type of credibility? Now, it wouldn't if it was random or it was not factual, and it was not insurance. It would just be another version of the brain fart that you have to explain. In this particular instance, it's highlighting everything about the car: the good, the bad, the ugly, the miles, the common problems. If those common problems happen to be part of that VIN number's current circumstances, has an ABS light. What's that mean? Has a previous accident. What's that mean? It has 12 navigation systems. What's that mean? In other words, extraordinarily packed up car with gear, right? What's that mean? And when that is actually in a monetary way revealed in a report, which, by the way, includes all of the pictures of that car this minute, like right now, sitting outside, or in the McGillicuddy's driveway, all of those pictures, that we know that right at this second, this is that car, this is that commodity on the block of commoditizing the VIN, how much it's worth and why it is, right? The price that you would trade the car for. Now, just like a new car invoice, when it's $114,000 liquor price, we'll sell it to you for $90,000. Okay, good. In this case, working obviously in the opposite direction, it's a $73,000 2020 S-Class, and this is the reason why we're giving you that price. It is a sport package. It does have a tonneau roof. It is white. Okay, now that's the reason why you're getting, it's had an accident. And this is the reason why you're not getting more for your car. That doesn't mean, just like when you discount the new car off of MSRP, you wouldn't go overboard to earn their business, the common term that we use constantly in the show. What do we have to do to earn your business? Well, in this case, you're earning the business based on logic and fact. If you would want to keep that car as a best end user, and you know that X, Y, and Z are currently wrong with that car, and what it will cost you going into the shop prior to the service manager coming around the corner 3 days after you trade the car to give you the bad news that you're going to spend $6,000 to get it on the front line. Prior to that, we're enunciating in clear and absolute factual detail what's wrong with the car. So when you're trading it, you know you traded a cat and not a dog. You dig it, Shoni? So in other words, based on that. The invoice, the facts, the empirical data that's irrefutable, turn out to be a portion of used car invoice. You see? And when that is handed to, let's say you're doing it online, you can do it online. Let's say you're doing a digital retail. Absolutely. It's built specifically for that. Let's say you're doing it in a traditional showroom circumstance where somebody finally stumbled back into your dealership and wants to buy a car and you're doing an appraisal. In all of those cases, it's built specifically to fill the gap. Now, if you want to trade for more because you've decided you are going to keep it, there's nothing to stop you from doing that. But you didn't start from the top and work forward, which obviously that's what I term welding yourself into the bitch. In other words, putting money on a car where you have to do 12 tricks to get back out of it, or mangle the numbers with other cars, or do all the things that dealers happen to do because of the circumstances of never being able to leverage fact as opposed to a number that was blown out of the clear air, not knowing exactly what the 17-digit VIN is. You could be the greatest appraiser of all times that's been in the business 50 years. Your grandfather actually was a Ford dealer in 1932. You can do all of that, but what you can't do is by osmosis walk the car, quarter panels be pinched. I got it. In other words, you ain't got no son. I got it. Right? So you can do all that type of mathematics in your brain and then figure out what you're going to retail it for, what you're going to spend on it, and how you're going to sell it to the bottom. You can do all of that. But what you didn't do was actually reveal the actual reality of the commodities value of the vehicle based on its characteristics. So you got to let that sink in for a second, right? Because everybody is surviving. Everybody's doing good. You said, thank God January's over. I know most people, including myself, thank God. I wish January would stay like this forever. In other words, we're having records in terms of what cars are bringing and how many we're selling and all the rest of it. It's unbelievable. So that portion of it's all good. The question becomes, is it good enough we want to overlook the process that when you plug it in and you put the information in and you snap the pictures, how is that leveraged in the communication gap? In other words, we're leaving Mr. Trump behind, over talking facts. Don't even worry about facts. Say whatever you want. It don't matter. As opposed to actually using empirical data that can't be refuted. You see, in other words, where it's actually there. What's that do for the conversation with the salesperson when he's jumping out of the chair and saying that his next door neighbor gave him $2,700 more for the car without having any concept if it's true or not, A, or B, what it is that they're buying somewhere else that actually somehow or other legitimize the idiocy of the statement that they got $4,000 more from somebody down the street, right? So in other words, that noise is to a large degree mitigated by the facts. If you want more, let's see if we can unwreck the car. Let's say, okay, no problem. Yeah, we'll definitely get them the same $4,000 more because don't forget, they probably sold the car and they have a osmosis machine that does all the body work and does, repairs the ABS system in the car. I'm sure they could do that. Or not. And if not, then we're back to dealing in an invoice, like it's got a S package, it's a sport, it's a thing. That's on the invoice of the new car. Now we did the same thing on the used car invoice. We highlight the fact that it's an ultimate package. It's got two-tone paint on the Rolls-Royce Ghost. Okay, that's a major plus. And so we did all the things that an invoice would do, but simultaneously we dug into the valuation of it based on those facts. You can't pay for chicken salad and then wind up getting chicken poop, right? Right? Because that won't work out. In other words, you're going backwards. Now, you could probably find a better market for chicken poop because car dealers are resourceful people. They'll figure out how to do it. You get the same price as chicken salad or not. And then the question becomes, if you have the option of leveraging fact to increase the transparency and communication with the millennial, right? Millennials, you got to remember something. They live in a place where everything is online, right? In other words, nothing is not online. Their whole entire existence there. And they trust, for the very most part, the facts that they find online, right? And if that's true, and this happens to be, you got to picture the process, actually. When you plug in that OBD, it becomes a Cecil B. DeMille, like a little bit of a I would say, a little bit of a movie, a little action play, right? Because as the vehicle's going through the cycle of 73,000 things that are being, let's say, checked to be sure that the SRS and the ABS and the CRD and the WDW and the trunk light and the power locks and the windows are coming up and down and the navigation flashed on and off and the radio turned. So, and then we already know if the camshaft is, and don't forget, we definitely know about the catalytic converter, or we also know, believe it or not, I know it would never happen where a consumer went to AutoZone and had the ABS light turned off 3 starts ago, 9 miles ago, just to bring it into the dealership when he trades it in. Because when you trade that car in, it had the lights turned off, right? No matter if Jesus or Mohammed was actually doing the appraisal, without the knowledge of what actually is wrong with it, you're going to overtrade the car. Period. End of the story. There's very little to converse about, right? And I think the invention that we have now created and will be implementing here to all new car, all used car, all auctions, all anybody that really want to know the truth about the car. You can always argue we only gave you, 119,000 on the 2002 Audi R8. You could say it's worth 1,000 more. You might be a better end user, and that's definitely not the case in terms of what we're at. The intent of the tool is it's to set an insurance value, a VIN-insurance number that absolutely is transact-able. It's not a bullshit number. It's not a brain fart number. It's not a book number because you use clean or double clean or triple rough or whatever you're doing. Like, no. Because that $10,000 spread puts you right back into the welding machine. The arc welder is right behind you at that point. You can hear it clicking off in the background, right? Because you picked the number out of the air. Has no relationship other than to your capability and guessing what is or isn't good or bad about that car, and your ability then to transact off of that, right? But what winds up being utterly unrelated to the science of what's possible. So if nothing else, in our, like the time that we've wasted in the car business as students, as, actors, as players, and as, hopefully folks that are developing things that will enable all car dealers, big, small, I don't care who you are, what you do, wholesale, retail, salvage for that matter, enable you to use a go-to set of circumstances, extraordinarily inexpensive, to actually enable better decision making. You got to picture it now. So I'm sure there's people saying, well, I never had a problem where I traded a car and the service manager said it needed 4,200. I've never had that issue. I've never had a problem with a salesperson because don't forget, it's a salesperson that sells 22 cars a month. He knows everything there is to know. And when that person pulls up, hey boss, I got to hit my opinion. Give me another $15 for this car. Is the question ever why? Well, can you write the deal? Can you put it out today? Is he leaving today in that car? Okay, I got that part. What? Just stop and think for 1 second, right? As ridiculous as that sounds. Well, let's just say you're as fancy as anybody can be, and you got your Cohan shoes on. It's a little wet outside, right? So you're thinking about when you see the $100 bill outside the car door window. Are you popping out to get your Cohans wet in order to pick the 100 up? If you're saying no, I believe you're maybe fibbing a bit. Okay, and what I'm saying is when you're appraising a car and you miss it by 3,700, even though you didn't miss it by 3,700 if you didn't know what was underneath the car. Right. This is obviously at the point of the spear. This isn't who you're using. I use eBlock. I use TradeRev. I use somebody else. I even use Man Express. Got nothing to do with that. You're using that in a strobe light sense. 4 blinks down. That's 4 blinks down. The chain of events of a VIN. Right. You got to own the car first before you start blinking down. You got to know what you're trading it for and what your exit strategy is. And 90% of the time, you're going to go ahead and get that bitch ready and sell it retail. Right? No question about that. Nobody's complaining about that. But it won't mean that you're going to overtrade by ignorance. And don't take that wrong as a stupid statement. It's the ignorance of not knowing as opposed to ignorance of being dumb. Right? If you don't know, it's difficult for you to know. Matter of fact, it's impossible. And if you're trying to undertrade cars, you really could be given $18 less than the car that guy down the street did. Because if you plug it in and you can see it's all green, you know that it ain't going to be a bad story when the service manager comes around the corner with a shit-eating grin on his face telling you what it needs. The story will change a little bit. Looks like this didn't need it or this needed it. And you could say, yeah, absolutely, go ahead and fix that bitch. Because we traded it based on a used car invoice for what it was worth. Now, again, you got to hit the plateau. You got to do something else. If you do plan to go ahead and self-weld, notice self-welding means you didn't get welded by a stranger not knowing. It means that you did it yourself. You lit that bitch up, the arc welders got one way, and you did it. But you know what? If you knew you did it, you know how to react to it, right? You can get ready for it. See, because you did it out of knowledge, not out of lack of knowledge. Does that make any sense to you, Sean? Because that's precisely an ancillary piece which dealers that are using it are finding incredible benefits, right? Better communication, better understanding before you start, better circumstance where the friction between salesperson and management, not that it's friction, I'm using the wrong word. Let's say the communication is at a different level. You almost are playing to the salesperson's sense of, I don't want to weld the dealership into the car. You got to picture it now. When I say the salesperson's the enemy, I don't mean he's the enemy. Of course, it's a stupid statement, but it's unfortunately a statement of fact. They're only focused on getting more over the curb, and it really don't make any difference what happens after that because that's on the dealership. But when you think about it, if you know that it's got this, there's 23 codes on that car. The probability of getting that car through the shop and getting it on the front line where the dealership A is going to make any profit on it whatsoever is extraordinarily low, especially when you're selling cars to the bottom. But let's just say when you're done with that vehicle, then you're going to pick up F&I. Again, all the rest of the story, I understand, right? So wouldn't it be like the same or better if you were making conscious decisions when you're pulling the trigger and you know when you're stepping on yourself and when you're not? That's the question, Sean. I mean, we can go into 100 different directions of this, that, and it's, you know, a Mercedes dealer or, you know, like a Lexus dealer is going to look at it differently. But you see, when you think about it, you could be a Hyundai, you could be a Kia dealer, you could be a buy here, pay here dealer, right? And the facts still remain. It's just a different way of twisting things in terms of how you're presenting things. When you think about it, the Highline store, it's a dream come true. First of all, the probability of the customer already knowing that they got X, Y, and Z wrong with the car is extraordinarily high. It's probably one of the motivations why they're trading the car. More importantly, when the same process is used in a service drive, think about it for a second. When every car going through the service drive is having a used car invoice created, think about how that eliminates the insanity of the I won't name the names of the companies that actually charge $6,000 a month to give 500 offers to a million different people and they convert at 1%. Imagine looking at your Accu-Trade lead board where they're highlighted as service drive appraisals / invoices. You see, now you can actually choose which ones you want to chase, which ones you don't. If you're chasing a 17 because it's coming off a lease and you know that car's worth more, right? Would you be chasing that car? And then would your sales department have a direct relationship to all the people in the service drive? You have to picture it. There's no dealership on earth where there's one entrance that goes in for service and for sales. They're two different entrances, like it's a condominium separation, right? One's got all the service writers. They're at 7 o'clock in the morning doing whatever they're doing. Salespeople show up at 8:30 because they're diligent. Next thing you know, nobody's paying attention to who's there, what's there. What if, triple, what if? Everybody already knows. So when you sit down at your desk, you already know who is in the service, how much the car's worth. The invoice is already built. You follow me? Now you know who it is, what it is, and what the conversation would be in order to contact the customer. It could just be, I'm awful happy to see that you brought your car for service. I can do anything you'd like to do. And by the way, because now we can go into why you want to sell them a car, even though it's only their second time they had it in for service, but you can trade them out for $6 more a month. And it happens to be a perfect car because the dealership is the best end user for that car for the front line. You see, it leads in places with simple logic and simple process that I don't think anybody else or anything else is remotely close. It's all about communication. It's all about putting skin in the game to help everyone understand exactly what they are, how many there are, where they are, how much they are, and then making logical decisions. Shawnee, you there? I put you to sleep again?
No, I think it's absolutely just a phenomenal approach to it. So if you're using new car invoices for dealing around, doesn't it make sense to use a used car invoice? And in order to get that used car invoice, you need a process. And it doesn't matter if it's challenging times or the market's ripping, right? If that same process is always there, it's always there. And all it does is enable that communication with when you're trying to acquire that vehicle. So whether it's doing, your VHR, you're putting the OBD2 reader in, it's just adding to that layers, creating the fact. And that fact on the used car invoice allows you to deal on the same page and the same level with the consumer, which is all really we want.
All the way down to presenting and shutting up. You follow that? You ever see somebody talk themselves out of deals, right? By continuing to talk when it's already done. Right? So picture this. When you're trying to explain to a consumer what it means that they wrecked their car when they're traded in, well, the invoice does it for you, and it quantifies it. You follow that? It's how much less that car is worth based on the commodities market of that unit, based on the characteristics, and the fact that I hope nobody was hurt, because you don't have to bring that topic any longer, when you were in the wreck. I don't see anybody on crutches, right? I've heard it many times in the show. Geez, I should get a big Carfax. I don't see anybody on crutches. Ha, ha, ha. Really funny, but bad communication skill, right? In other words, all the way through why you bought an empty can, no equipment, and what that means. What it would mean if it did, what it means if it don't. You don't. Therefore, this is. You see what I'm saying? They look the same until you get inside. Then you got roll-up windows, crank windows, push seats, etc. No navigation and no roof. That is not the same car as one that's all packed up with gear. The invoice does the talking. You don't need a salesperson with extraordinarily good communication knowledge of the business in order to tell it. More importantly, it's coming out on a computer or on a printout. So it's not the salesperson that might not have the credibility that the internet does when it comes shooting through to you. Sense, Shawnee?
Very much so. And I think that's a great way to end it for today. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, everybody. Have fun.